50 years. Louis Armstrong had been fighting for 50 years. By 1952, he was 50 years old, tired, but never broken. That day at NBC Studios, something happened. A small incident, but the kind that changes everything. A young woman stopped him, spoke harshly, made a mistake. Louis's response wasn't what anyone expected. No anger, no pride, just compassion. And that compassion changed everyone in that room. Forever. But what exactly happened? Why did a young woman stop Louis Armstrong from touching a piano? And what did Louis say that left even Bing Crosby speechless? The answer reveals something profound about who Louis Armstrong really was, not just as a musician, but as a human being. Before we explore this powerful story of grace overcoming injustice, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. What Louis Armstrong did that day will change how you think about forgiveness, dignity, and true strength. To understand what happened at NBC Studios in 1952, we need to understand Louis Armstrong, not just the legend. The man. Louis Daniel Armstrong was born August 4, 1901, New Orleans, Louisiana, into a world that told him he didn't matter, that he wasn't worthy, that he should know his place. For 50 years, Louis had been proving that world wrong, but not through anger, not through bitterness, through music, through joy, through an unwavering belief that kindness was stronger than cruelty. By 1952, Louis was one of the most famous musicians in America, had played for presidents, had performed in the finest concert halls, had records that sold millions. But fame didn't protect him from racism, didn't shield him from indignity. Every day Louis faced situations that reminded him some people would never see him as equal. Hotels that wouldn't give him rooms, restaurants that wouldn't serve him, venues where he performed for white audiences but couldn't use the same entrance, the same bathroom, the same water fountain. Louis endured it all, with grace, with that famous smile, not because he was weak, but because he understood something crucial, that anger, justified as it was, wouldn't open the doors he needed opened, wouldn't change the hearts he needed changed. So Louis chose a different weapon, kindness, joy, making people happy. And slowly, imperceptibly, hearts did change, doors did open. In early 1952, Louis was invited to perform on The Bing Crosby Show. This was significant. Bing Crosby was one of the biggest stars in America. Singer, actor, cultural icon, the show was broadcast on NBC, reaching millions of viewers. For a black musician to appear as Bing's guest, not just as background entertainment, but as a featured performer, was meaningful, represented progress, represented opportunity. Louis was excited not just for himself, but for what it represented. Every time he appeared on a major platform like this, he was opening the door wider for the next generation of black artists, was showing America that black musicians deserved respect, admiration, recognition. The taping was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon in February. NBC Studios in New York, Louis arrived early, always did. Professional to his core, brought his trumpet. His band would join him later. Was shown to the backstage area, large space, crowded with equipment, cameras, lights, props, people rushing around, preparing for the show. Louis found a quiet corner, sat down, waited. This was normal. The waiting, the being in spaces but not quite belonging, even at 50 years old, even as a star. There was always a subtle reminder. You're here, but you're different. Louis had learned to ignore it, to focus on the music, on the performance, on what he could control. The information in this video is compiled from documented interviews, archival news books, and historical reports. For narrative purposes, some parts are dramatized and may not represent 100% factual accuracy. We also use AI-assisted visuals and AI narration for cinematic reconstruction. The use of AI does not mean the story is fake. It is a storytelling tool. Our goal is to recreate the spirit of that era as faithfully as possible. Enjoy watching. After about 20 minutes, Louis stood, stretched, looked around. The backstage area was temporarily empty. Most people were on the main stage, setting up. Louis's eyes fell on a piano. Sitting in the corner, old upright, probably used for rehearsals. Louis loved pianos. Had started his musical education on piano before switching to trumpet. Still played when he had the chance, walked over to it, looked at it. Beautiful instrument, even old and worn. reached out his hand, fingers hovering over the keys, about to press down. Suddenly a voice. Sharp, loud, stop! Louis froze, hands still in the air, turned. A young woman was rushing toward him, early 20s, blonde hair, dressed professionally, looked panicked, angry. She reached Louis, breathing hard. "What do you think you're doing?" Louis smiled, that automatic Louis Armstrong smile, gentle, disarming. "I was just going to play a little, ma'am. Didn't mean any harm." The woman's face hardened. "That piano is not for you, it's for the musicians, for the show. You can't just touch studio equipment." Louis' smile faded slightly, but he kept his voice calm, polite. "I understand, I apologize, I'll leave it alone." The woman crossed her arms. "You need to stay in the designated areas. This is a professional studio, we have rules." Louis nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I'll wait over there." He gestured to the corner where he'd been sitting. The woman watched him, making sure he moved away from the piano. Satisfied, she turned and walked toward the stage area, muttering something about people not knowing their place. Louis returned to his corner, sat down. The smile was gone now, just for a moment, replaced by something else. Sadness, weariness, the weight of 50 years. But then he took a breath, put the smile back on. This was nothing new. Had experienced worse, much worse. This was just another reminder, another moment to endure, another test of his resolve to stay kind. What Louis didn't know was that several crew members had witnessed the interaction, had seen the young woman stop him, had heard her sharp tone, and were shocked. Because they knew something the woman didn't. That wasn't just some random person. That was Louis Armstrong, one of the biggest stars in music, Bing Crosby's personal guest, and he'd just been treated like an intruder, like someone who didn't belong. One crew member, a sound technician named Frank, immediately went to find the producer. Frank had worked with Louis before on other shows, knew him as kind, professional, gracious, knew this situation was about to become a disaster. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly because of a misunderstanding? How did you react? Share your thoughts in the comments. Frank found the producer, George Hamilton, on the main stage. "Mr. Hamilton, we have a situation." George looked up from his clipboard. "What kind of situation?" "Your new assistant just stopped Louis Armstrong from touching the piano backstage, told him it wasn't for him." George's face went white. "She what?" Frank nodded. Didn't recognize him, thought he was just some guy wandering around, spoke to him pretty harshly. George's hands clenched. "Where is she?" "Still backstage, I think." George started walking quickly toward backstage, his mind racing. This was bad, really bad. Louis Armstrong was not just any performer, was Bing's personal friend. Bing had specifically requested him for this show. And George's assistant had just humiliated him. As George rushed backstage, another person had also heard about the incident, Bing Crosby himself. Bing had been in his dressing room when one of his people mentioned it. "Mr. Crosby, there's been an incident with Mr. Armstrong." Bing's expression changed immediately. "What happened?" the staff member explained. "The assistant, the piano, the harsh words." Bing stood up, face flushed. "That's unacceptable. Where is this assistant? Where's Louis?" "Backstage, sir." Bing started walking, fast, angry. Bing Crosby was known for being easygoing, friendly, professional. But he had strong principles, and one of them was treating people with respect, especially his friends. Louis Armstrong was more than a colleague to Bing, was a friend, someone Bing admired deeply, not just for his music, for his character, for how he carried himself with dignity despite constant indignity. And now, someone on Bing's show had disrespected him. That was unacceptable. George reached backstage first, saw his assistant Jennifer standing near the piano, looking satisfied with herself, saw Louis sitting in the corner, calm, patient. George's anger flared. "Jennifer!" The young woman turned, smiled. "Yes, Mr. Hamilton, do you know who that man is?" George pointed to Louis. Jennifer glanced at Louis, shrugged. "No, sir." "Should I?" "That's Louis Armstrong." Jennifer's smile vanished, face went pale. "The Louis Armstrong..." George nodded sharply. "The Louis Armstrong performing on our show tonight, Bing Crosby's personal guest, and you just told him he couldn't touch the piano?" Jennifer's hands started shaking. I didn't know. I thought he was just... he didn't say who." Before she could finish, Bing Crosby entered backstage, saw Louis, saw George, saw Jennifer. His face was set, determined, angry. Bing walked straight to Jennifer. "You're the assistant who spoke to Mr. Armstrong." Jennifer nodded, unable to speak, trembling. "You will apologize." Bing's voice was cold. right now, in front of everyone. You will tell him you were wrong, that you're sorry, that you had no right to speak to him that way." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears, starting to understand the magnitude of her mistake. "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry I didn't." Bing held up his hand. "Don't apologize to me. Apologize to him." Jennifer turned toward Louis, who had stood up, watching this unfold. His face was unreadable. Jennifer opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Louis stepped forward, put his hand gently on Bing's shoulder. "Bing, please." Bing turned, looked at Louis, still angry, but confused. "Louis, she needs to apologize. What she did was—" Louis shook his head gently. "She didn't know, Bing. She was doing her job, protecting the equipment. That's a good thing, shows she cares about the studio. Please subscribe if this story is touching your heart. The most powerful moment is still coming." Bing stared at Louis, unable to process what he was hearing. "But Louis, she spoke to you like someone who shouldn't be touching the piano," Louis finished. "I know, but she didn't know who I was. Can't fault someone for not recognizing everyone." George stepped forward. "Mr. Armstrong, this is completely unacceptable. She should have asked who you were. Should have been respectful regardless." Louis turned to George, smiled. That famous smile. But this time, there was something else in it. Wisdom, kindness, strength. "Mr. Hamilton, she's young. She's new, I assume?" George nodded. "Started 3 weeks ago." Louis continued. "She's learning. Made a mistake. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next, and what I'd like to do is forget this happened and focus on tonight's show." Jennifer was crying now, softly, ashamed, overwhelmed. Louis looked at her, really looked at her, saw a young woman, scared, doing her best, made an error, but not a bad person. "Ma'am," Louis said gently, "you don't need to apologize to me. You were protecting this studio. That's your job. You did it well." Jennifer looked up, tears streaming down her face. "But I didn't know." "I should have," Louis interrupted softly. "How could you know? We've never met. And I should have introduced myself when I came in." "That's on me, not you." The backstage area was completely silent. Everyone who'd gathered to witness this confrontation was frozen, watching, processing. Bing put his hand on Louis's arm. "Louis, you don't have to do this." She was wrong. Louis turned to Bing, smiled. "Bing, my friend, I've spent 50 years dealing with people who treated me badly on purpose, with malice, with hate. This young lady didn't do that. She just didn't recognize me. That's not a sin. That's just life. And I'd rather spend my energy making music with you than holding a grudge over a misunderstanding." Bing looked at Louis for a long moment, then slowly nodded. "You're a better man than I am," Louis chuckled. "Just older, had more time to learn." He turned back to Jennifer. "You take care of this studio, you hear? It's a good place, needs people who care about it." Jennifer nodded, unable to speak. Louis patted her shoulder gently, then walked back to his corner, sat down, pulled out his trumpet, started quietly playing scales, warming up, as if nothing had happened. George and Bing stood together, watching Louis. George spoke quietly. "I've never seen anything like that," Bing nodded. "That's Louis. Always has been, always will be. Makes the rest of us look small." George turned to Jennifer, who was still crying. "You understand what just happened?" Jennifer wiped her eyes, nodded. "I treated him terribly, and he defended me. Took the blame himself." George's voice was firm but not unkind. "You made a serious mistake, but you've also just witnessed something rare. Real grace, real forgiveness. Don't waste it. Learn from it." Jennifer nodded. "I will. I promise." The rest of the day proceeded normally. Louis rehearsed with Bing. They ran through their numbers, joked between takes, the professional camaraderie evident. When evening came, the show was taped in front of a live studio audience. Bing introduced Louis with genuine warmth and admiration. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce a man who is not only one of the finest musicians alive, but one of the finest human beings I've ever known. Mr. Louis Armstrong." The audience erupted in applause. Louis walked out, trumpet in hand, smiling. That famous smile, performed brilliantly. Made the audience laugh, made them cry, made them forget everything except the beauty of the music. After the show backstage, people congratulated Louis, shook his hand, thanked him. Louis was gracious with everyone. As always, Jennifer approached hesitantly. Mr. Armstrong. Louis turned, smiled warmly. Hello, young lady, how are you? Jennifer took a deep breath. I just wanted to say, I know you said I didn't need to apologize, but I am sorry, I was wrong. And the way you handled it, the way you... She paused, trying to find words. You changed my life today. Louis looked surprised. Changed your life? That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? Jennifer shook her head. No, sir, I mean it. I grew up thinking, well, I had certain ideas about people, about who deserved respect. And in one moment, you showed me how wrong I was. Not by being angry, not by putting me in my place, but by being kind, by taking the blame when you didn't have to, by seeing me as a person who made a mistake instead of just someone who was wrong. Louis finished gently. Jennifer nodded. You could have gotten me fired, should have gotten me fired, but you protected me. Why? Louis thought for a moment. Because holding grudges is exhausting, because everyone deserves a second chance, because I've made plenty of mistakes in my life, and people gave me grace. Figured I should pass it along. He paused, then added, and because I believe people are better than their worst moments. You made a mistake. But you're not a bad person. Don't define yourself by this. Learn from it and move forward. Jennifer wiped her eyes again. Thank you. I'll never forget this. I'll never forget you. Louis patted her hand. Just be kind to people. That's all I ask. Pass it on. Years later, Jennifer would tell this story, in interviews, to her children, to anyone who would listen, about the day she made a terrible mistake. And Louis Armstrong chose grace instead of justice, chose teaching instead of punishment, chose kindness instead of revenge. She would say it changed not just her behavior, but her entire worldview, taught her that true strength isn't about asserting dominance. It's about lifting others up, even when they don't deserve it, especially when they don't deserve it. The NBC incident became legendary, not in the newspapers, not in official reports, but in the quiet stories people told about who Louis Armstrong really was. Crew members who were there that day would talk about it for decades. About watching a man who had every right to be angry choose compassion instead, about seeing real grace in action. Bing Crosby mentioned it in his autobiography years later, wrote about Louis's character, about how that backstage moment revealed more about true dignity than any performance ever could. The piano stayed in that NBC backstage area for years. Crew members who knew the story would sometimes tell newcomers, see that piano, Louis Armstrong once almost played it, and what happened next taught everyone here what it really means to be a legend, because Louis Armstrong's legacy wasn't just his music, wasn't just his innovations in jazz, wasn't just his performances, it was how he treated people. All people, even those who didn't recognize him, even those who spoke harshly, even those who made mistakes. Louis understood something fundamental, that every interaction was an opportunity to spread kindness, to teach, to make the world slightly better. And he never wasted those opportunities, never let bitterness win, never let anger define him. In 1952, Louis Armstrong was 50 years old, had been fighting racism, poverty, and prejudice for half a century, had earned the right to be bitter, to be angry, to demand respect. Instead, he chose grace, chose to protect a young woman who'd made a mistake, chose to turn a moment of injustice into a teaching moment. That's what made Louis Armstrong a legend, not just what he did on stage, but who he was off it, not just how he played trumpet, but how he treated people, not just his art, but his heart. The young woman who stopped him from playing that piano learned that day what many people never learn in a lifetime. That true greatness isn't about power, it's about compassion. That real strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. That the measure of a person isn't how they treat those who can help them, but how they treat those who can't. Louis Armstrong could have destroyed that young woman's career with a word, could have demanded an apology, could have made an example of her. Instead, he defended her, took the blame himself, turned her shame into a lesson, and in doing so, taught everyone watching what it really means to be great. Today, when we think of Louis Armstrong, we think of his music, his trumpet, his gravelly voice, his innovations in jazz, but those who knew him, those who witnessed moments like the NBC incident, they remember something else. They remember kindness, grace, humanity. They remember a man who, despite facing a lifetime of injustice, chose to respond with love. They remember someone who understood that the highest form of strength is gentleness, that the greatest revenge against hatred is kindness, that the most powerful statement against injustice is grace. Thank you, Louis Armstrong, for the music, for the joy, for the innovations, but most of all, for the lessons, for showing us how to respond to injustice with grace, how to turn moments of shame into moments of teaching, how to see people not as their worst moments, but as their potential. The piano sits silent now in a museum, but if you listen closely, you can still hear the lesson it taught. That true legends aren't made just by what they achieve, but by how they treat others, especially those who make mistakes, especially those who don't recognize them, especially those who need grace. Louis Armstrong knew that, lived that, and left us all a little better for it, forever.